A beloved law enforcement officer is found dead in his home.
David went into the bedroom first. I saw him almost try to grab him into his arms. At that point, I could not go into the room.
He suffered a gunshot wound to the head. There is a gun lying on the bed next to him.
Right away, your mind goes to suicide, because that would be the only way anything like this could happen.
But evidence suggests foul play was involved.
There was no indication there was any blood or blood spatter on that firearm.
And it was fully loaded.
A dead man can't reload the gun. I was like, who would want to do this? I had no idea.
The investigation reveals at least 2 suspects, and both of them are fellow officers.
She was disciplined for what she had done to other classmates at the academy.
He told me that she was psychotic. He texted me and telling me that he wanted to get back and whatever.
You can tell that she was in a very dark place.
Why did they wake him up before they killed him? Why? Because you're pure evil.
Friday, August 19th, 2022. It's a little after 3 p.m. in Citrus County, Florida, when the sheriff's office receives a desperate 911 call.
Just 911 with the emergency. My name is Jacqueline Schweitzer. Okay, tell me exactly what happened. We just came to his house to see if he was okay. We came into his bedroom. His gun is out. He is all bloody. He's dead. What's his name? Corey, C-O-R-Y. Last name is Schweitzer.
They haven't heard from their son. They knew he was sick. Corey's father, mother, and sister get inside the house, and they have found their son deceased in his bedroom.
The information that I was told initially that it was a possible suicide.
When investigators arrive, they find the body of 31-year-old Corey Schweitzer in his bed.
He suffered a gunshot wound to the head. There is a gun lying on the bed next to him.
When I observed Corey, there was a lot of blood on his face, his left arm, blood pooled on the comforter there, and it rolled off the bed onto the floor. I did introduce myself to the Schweitzer family. I will forever remember Mr. Schweitzer sitting in the recliner in the living room. He's a very large, looks like he's a very strong man, and he was visibly shaken. Just like most people when they lose their loved ones. Mrs. Schweitzer as well was very upset, and Corey's sister, they did not think that he would ever commit suicide. So I sat down and began my interview one by one with them. There was a lot of unknown, a lot of questions that I needed answered.
Corey Adam Schweitzer was born April 7th, 1991 in Stony Brook, New York, the son of a police officer and a school teacher. It was a tight-knit family, and when Corey's sister Kara was born, they became inseparable.
We were born a year and 10 days apart, so they called us the Irish twins. Basically, we grew up doing everything together.
They were each other's best friends. So whatever Corey wanted to do, Kara wanted to do.
He wrestled and did karate ever since we were like 4 years old. So he grew up doing that. He went to states, he won states. He had so many trophies, plaques, medals.
Corey was big into martial arts, but he had more of that Buddhist type philosophy where if people would yell at you or scream, he'd take the attitude that they weren't really angry with you. They were having trouble with their own lives, and they were just projecting the anger to you.
After high school, Corey decided to try putting his Zen philosophy to work as an air traffic controller.
You're lucky if one or two people out of the 16 pass. Corey missed it by like 2 points, and he was done.
When he came home, it was a difficult time, and he had left to live with his first girlfriend in Texas.
He found a job at AutoZone, but he knew he wanted something more, but wasn't sure at that point what that was.
Corey said, well, things aren't going well in Texas with my girlfriend, so his job transferred him.
In 2017, Corey relocated again, this time to Florida to live with his grandfather. Within a few years, the rest of the family joined him there.
He moved down here with my grandpa. They were like best little friends. They would go out and do things together. My grandpa passed away in June of 2020.
After his grandfather's passing, Corey decided to stay in Florida.
Corey loved Florida. He really took to it. He loved the weather. He likes to do things outdoors.
He went to a gym, him and his father, the local YMCA, completely just out of this world character. He'd come in with Buddha beads on, big loop earrings, just muscle shirts. And he was probably one of the most chill guys you'd ever meet.
Just before he turned 30, Corey finally found his calling.
My dad was a cop, and we grew up with that, and it was kind of cool. Corey looked into the academy, and he's like, that's not bad. So he went through the corrections academy.
He applied to Marion County Corrections Department and was a corrections deputy at the jail.
I was in the duty hut, which was next to the jail. We were all law enforcement except for my mom.
He loved the people that he worked with. They were like family.
Inmates respected him. He didn't go in there and talk to them like they weren't human beings. He pushed people to strive to be better. I don't know one person that had anything bad to say about Corey.
While working as a corrections deputy, Corey began dating a fellow coworker, a single mother named Ashley Tucker.
Ashley, she works for the sheriff's office. She actually started as a detention assistant, which is a civilian post. Put herself through school with the sheriff's department and now is a detention deputy. She was great. Corey cared a lot about her.
We were all very happy for him and excited. We all liked Ashley. She has a little boy.
He was good with the baby. He would play with the baby all the time, and, you know, he was just, he had a natural dad type of quality to him.
One Sunday, we had a big barbecue, and David and I were sitting on lounge chairs, just surveying the whole thing. And he looked at me and he goes, "You look like you're gonna cry." And I said, "Well, I can't help it." I said, "The whole family is here. Everybody is at peace. This is the way I always want to remember life."
The once peaceful Schweitzer family has been struck by tragedy after discovering Corey's lifeless body. His newfound purpose in life makes it difficult for them to believe he would commit suicide.
I was just like, no. He would never kill himself. Like, he was the happiest person. And, like, if there was a situation going on that he was upset, he would have called me.
Thank God for my husband and my daughter. They both switched from parent and sister mode to police mode. My husband said he has a bullet hole in his right cheek. He is left-handed. The gun is down by his left shin.
If you shot yourself like this or like this, the gun would be laying on the floor. Why sit down by his leg, out of reach?
Could it have been a self-inflicted gunshot wound? Yes, it could have been, but After listening to the family statements and they started to process everything, I started to question some of the things that I saw, and I really started to have suspicion that something foul had happened at that residence.
Coming up, Corey's family recounts suspicious messages.
The Schweitzer family received a text message from Corey.
It was ended with an LOL. That's not a Corey thing.
And a suspect emerges.
We've told absolutely nobody he's dead. How does she even know he was shot?
Detectives with the Citrus County Sheriff's Office are investigating the death of 31-year-old Corey Schweitzer.
The last time they spoke with Corey, they had had dinner at his house with his girlfriend, and they were texting back and forth about having a get-together. And then on the morning of the 18th, the Schweitzer family received a text message from Corey stating that he had COVID.
It says, hey, I don't feel good. I called into work for the next week. Don't come over. But it was ended with an LOL. That's not a Corey thing.
My mom's like, that's weird. So she texts back like, is Ashley gonna take care of you? You know, because she's being mom.
I didn't get any message back until 11 o'clock at night saying, I'm okay, you don't have to come over type thing.
Corey's sister says the next day she received an alarming text message from Corey's girlfriend.
Ashley starts texting me. I'm like, hey, I don't want to sound like that girlfriend, but your brother broke up with me and I think something's wrong. So I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I don't know. He was saying weird things. I don't think he would say that. His texts were, I don't love you anymore. I'm breaking up with you. You just want me for my money. And I said, that's crazy. So I went to his house. I rang the doorbell. He didn't answer. I had a key because, you know, we were close. I let myself in, and then his bedroom door was shut. So I knock on the bedroom door, and there's nothing. Like, there should have been a snore. This man snored like a trucker. I was, like, eerie, just sitting in that house. I'm like, something is so wrong.
Kara says she tried to open the bedroom door, but it was locked.
So then I start calling him, and his phone's not even buzzing in there. So I call my dad. I'm like, you need to get here, like, immediately.
David opened the door to the bedroom because we had all those little keys on the top of the doors. And he went into the bedroom first.
He was laying in the bed. His hand was out to the side, and I touched his arm and he was cold.
I saw him almost try to grab him into his arms. And at that point, I could not go into the room. I just couldn't. I turned right out and I walked away. Right away, your mind goes to suicide, because that would be the only way you could think that anything like this could happen. But I did not believe in my heart of hearts it was suicide.
The investigative team begins scouring the home for evidence.
His service duty weapon was found on the bed somewhere between the knee and his ankle, and there was no indication that there was any blood or blood spatter on that firearm.
I observed one round in the chamber, and then it was a 17-round magazine. I unloaded the magazine, and we do what is called a round count. I lined all the ammunition up, and I counted. And I counted 15, 16, 17. And at first, I just thought, I miscounted. because I knew what that would mean if it was 17. So I ran through it again, and I counted them again.
I'll never forget, and she said, "Detective Dowling, the gun was fully loaded."
The discovery confirms what Corey's father had already observed. There is no way Corey could have shot himself.
A dead man can't reload the gun.
The rounds that were in the magazine and the firearm were spear rounds. So then, naturally, we start looking for the spent shell casing from a gun that was fired.
Right behind the nightstand, kind of in the corner of the room, was a fired shell casing. I observed the head stamp to be a Blazer 9mm fired shell casing. They were different manufacturers.
So we knew that there was going to be another gun. That quickly took my mind to there was somebody else at this scene, and it was our job to go find them.
They said to me simply, and to Kara and to my wife, "Who would kill Corey?"
I was like, who would want to do this? Why would they do this? I had no idea.
There was no forced entry. It didn't appear like, somebody tried to burglarize the place.
Then I noticed that the slider on the right side in the master bedroom, that was unsecured. That was the only point of entry unless somebody had a key. So I believe that the suspect had checked the residence and noticed that that back slider was left open, or knew that he left the door unlocked. The statements from the family members about how happy Corey was, how good things were going with his career and his new girlfriend, things were just going so well. But I knew that Ashley was the next person that I needed to talk to. A lot of outside people don't know what's really going on within that home. So behind closed doors, violent crimes such as this can occur with domestic partners.
Hours into their investigation, Florida detectives have determined Corey Schweitzer was murdered. And the evidence suggests the shooter could be someone he knew well.
The scene did not appear that there was forced entry, a burglary. There was nothing missing.
It was brought to my attention that Corey did have a current girlfriend, about 6 months. He supposedly had sent a breakup text message to her, but everybody kept telling me that there was no issues, things were great.
Corey's girlfriend, 22-year-old Ashley Tucker, learns from superiors at work something is going on at Corey's home. She arrives on scene and speaks with investigators.
When I was at work and they put me in the office and they were like, Corey was found dead. And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting that.
How long have you known
Corey? I've known him for like at least a year. We were coworkers at the jail, but we didn't start dating. We've been dating for like 6 months.
And how's y'all's relationship? Have you ever had a fight?
We never had a fight. Never had an argument. We never had a bad day, ever.
Quickly, I could tell that Ashley, she was genuine. She was very upset, confused, and just lost someone in her life that meant a lot to her and her son. She told me on the 18th, around 5 in the morning, she had texted Corey. Corey had replied, "Good morning, my love," and he was going to bring her cookies. And then at the end of the message, he had sent 4 heart emojis. 2 hours later, Ashley receives a really weird text message, and it was a breakup message from Corey.
He's never texted me nothing like this before. It's hard for me, but I'm not ready to be in a relationship with you. I'm sorry that it came down to me texting you, but I know you're using me for my money. You're not the one for me.
It's very obvious to Ashley that it either isn't him, something's not right, because it's completely out of character for the relationship that they had.
She allowed me to look through her phone, had her duty weapon with her, let me look at the duty weapon, count the rounds.
They double-checked her work schedule to in fact confirm what she had said and where she was.
Ashley is cleared of any alleged involvement in the crime, but she believes there is someone else who might have wanted Corey dead.
She told me that he had an ex-girlfriend that she believed could have been involved if there was foul play. I was provided a name, Jacqueline Johnson-Cabrera.
He told me, she's psychotic. I ended it with her. She had a fallout with my family and, just basically always cause problems.
While investigators are gathering information about Corey's ex, his sister Kara starts receiving several phone calls.
She had 3 or 4 phone calls saying, "Oh my God, we heard your brother killed himself. What happened?"
I got a phone call from a boy at the academy and then a girl at the academy. So then I answered the girl because she was my friend. And I'm like, "How do you know anything's going on?" And she's just like, "Oh, well, this other girl's calling me saying that, Jackie says your brother's dead, that he killed himself, that he shot himself in the head." And I'm like, first of all, how does she even know he was shot? Second of all, how does she know it was in the head? I said, this girl has way too much information considering we all just found him and nobody knows anything.
Kara alerts investigators and gives them as much information as she can. She explains that her brother met Jacqueline Johnson-Cabrera working at the prison, and they started dating in the spring of 2020. Right away, the family knew it was a mistake.
We had invited them over, and it went to crap real fast because her personality was she was rude, obnoxious, acted like she was better than everybody else.
Kara and Jackie were applying to the police academy here. One of the first things out of her mouth was, "What you gonna do when I get to the academy and you don't?"
She's telling me she graduated high school early because she was so smart at 16, then went to, first it was 4 years of college, then did some work for the FBI, and then she was also working in the jails for 2 years. If you add up these numbers, you gotta be 28 years old, and you're 21. So right then and there, we knew she was full of crap. She's just a compulsive liar. I don't understand why he didn't pick up on this.
They had asked Corey numerous times to leave her. It was destroying the family.
I think they realized pretty quickly it wasn't a healthy relationship, but he wanted to try to make the relationship work, and he wanted to see, and I think as Ashley said, it wanted to see the good in her.
But now, they suspect Jacqueline might have been more than just a nightmare ex-girlfriend.
It was clear to the people that knew the two of them that she, once they had broken up, harbored some resentment and had made some statements indicating that essentially if she wasn't going to have him, nobody could have him.
Coming up, disturbing details of Jacqueline's law enforcement career are exposed.
She's somebody that should never, ever have been put on that job.
And detectives locate the murder weapon.
I'll never forget, my hand actually started to shake a little bit because I knew this was the weapon that had killed Corey.
Detectives have a new name connected to the murder of 31-year-old Corey Schweitzer, his ex-girlfriend and former co-worker, 22-year-old Jacqueline Johnson-Cabrera.
I believe she's from New York. She had been a Marion County detention deputy working in the jail.
What I know about Jacqueline is she really doesn't have a lot of family, but she was kind of to herself. She really didn't do much outside of work.
Corey was excited to be dating her, honestly. It was a new relationship. He was just like, "Oh, this girl Jackie, she's so cute, she's funny, she works with me, she gets it."
A lot of people had mixed feelings about her. She had an attitude, Jackie just always had something slick to say.
A background check reveals that in 2021, she left her position at the prison due to allegations of negligence.
She was transporting an inmate for medical treatment. When she was changing the restraints, he bolted.
The jail, they said to her, listen, do you want to talk about what happened? And she's like, nope. So they're like, okay, well, you are going to be forced to resign or we're going to fire you. And she said, fine, which allowed her to get another job in law enforcement, which was a huge mistake.
He was financially supporting her, and Corey paid for her to go through the Withlacoochee Police Academy.
Corey's family says he didn't see the truth about Jacqueline until she and his sister entered the police academy together.
She was having problems with her academy classmates.
While we were there, she was nothing but obnoxious. She had made up a rumor that I hit her, so hard that she was crying and had to go home early, hit her. And I'm like, I didn't even touch you. Are we serious right now? And then she claims that I did it in front of the classroom, too.
When attempts to get Kara expelled didn't work, the family says Jacqueline threatened her.
Corey and I had a big argument over her after she threatened his sister. My job in law enforcement was to protect the innocent and to help people. That's what you should be going into that career for. She's somebody that should never, ever have been put on that job.
Records indicate Kara wasn't the only cadet who came into conflict with Jacqueline.
Sheriff's Office detectives had contact with the administration at the academy, and it turned out she was disciplined for what she had done to other classmates.
Jackie got kicked out of the academy in January 2022, and he broke up with her. That relationship lasted 2 years, but I think he basically realized, holy, she is as toxic as they are saying.
I think Jackie was manipulative and very controlling when it came to Corey. She did not like the fact that we had a strong family bond because she did not have that with her family. I was very happy that he was ending that relationship. We had old Corey back.
Corey's loved ones hoped that would be the last they heard of Jacqueline. But it quickly became clear she was not going away so easily.
She was calling him all the time, bothering him. She was getting very possessive. She was acting crazy.
In July of that year, I got a text message from someone saying, "Is this Kara?" And all I texted back was, "Why?" After I said, "Why?" this lengthy text message came to me.
It was this nasty thing saying that, Kara, you're a piece of you should have the crap beat out of you, you're a racist, nobody likes you. Nasty things.
We came to the conclusion this has to be from Jackie. At that point, we had said, "Listen, Corey, we hope you're not still helping her financially." And that's when we found out that he was still helping her a little bit.
He was still paying for her apartment. He was still buying her groceries.
By that point, Corey had started dating Ashley Tucker. But he wasn't the kind of person who bore a grudge.
His attitude was, I'm going to help her financially so she doesn't lose her place. And then what's going to happen is she's going to get another job. She's going to find a new boyfriend. And then she's going to forget all about me. So there's no need to hurt anyone's feelings. But it didn't work that way with her.
After that text message, he was like, "That's it, I'm done."
He stopped paying for her apartment and stopped paying for her groceries. He wanted his relationship with Ashley to be just with her, without Jackie. in the background like, I need this, I need that.
He just severed all ties, and that may have been a catalyst for him getting killed.
Investigators paid Jacqueline a visit at her apartment in Ocala, Florida, 32 miles from Corey's home.
When I got to her residence, I got no answer. It's about 1 a.m, so I gave it a shot to try with the neighbor. He came outside and he said, yeah, she was here a day prior, maybe 2 days prior, but she hasn't been home since, and this neighbor gave me her telephone number. I tried calling it a handful of times. I got no answer. I couldn't locate any current family members, so I was a little worried.
After the stories they've heard, detectives can't rule out the possibility Jacqueline might hurt someone else.
There were some concerns about, her being a law enforcement officer and her training in firearms.
I was concerned that there was an armed individual possibly involved in a murder. It was a bit scary.
The morning after Corey Schweitzer was found dead, the search for his potential killer, Jacqueline Johnson-Cabrera, gets underway. But investigators don't have to look very far.
I received a telephone call from Jacqueline. She agreed to meet me at my office. When I got there, she had a friend with her.
Jacqueline confirms she and Corey broke up in February 2022, but says she wasn't the one who seemed unable to handle it. She claims the morning before his death, Corey messaged her trying to get back together.
He texted me Thursday morning, which was kind of out of the blue, because he had blocked my number, but we kept contact each other, Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
But he texted me and telling me that he wanted to get back and whatever, and I told him I moved on.
Do you have those messages?
Yeah, I do. I can show you it.
Jacqueline did allow law enforcement to look at her phone, and they saw some text messages which weren't consistent with her story.
It was obvious that she was initiating the conversations, trying to get him to reply. She had sent hey multiple times, nothing. This was in July. Beginning of August, she sent another hey, nothing. Then August 18th, around 8 in the morning, he sends a message. He wants to get back with her. She questions, well, don't you have a girlfriend? Corey says, I broke up with her, which just didn't seem right. I think she had sent messages from his phone. I wasn't believing that Corey had sent them.
Investigators asked Jacqueline to account for her whereabouts during the previous 2 days when Corey was allegedly sick.
She had told me that she went down to Tampa and was on her way home during the day that we thought this murder was committed.
Is there any chance that you drove into Pine Ridge the day that you came back from Tampa?
No.
Your car won't be in Pine Ridge at all?
Not that I can recall, no.
She had purchased a 9mm 4 or 5 days before this happened.
It's a Taurus, that's all I know. It just looked cute, so I got it. It's like personal use. It's pretty much what it is.
And when asked about that firearm, she'd indicated that she gave it to her friend's mother for safekeeping.
At this point, I knew I needed to probably hurry up and wrap up this interview because that gun wasn't going to be there very long.
Detectives speak with Jacqueline's friend and get a contact number for her mother, Angela.
I then called Angela, and Angela told me, yeah, I have the firearm. It's in my safe and it'll be ready for you when you get here. They were under the impression that Corey had killed himself. And so they didn't want Jacqueline to do the same because they thought that she loved him so much. I told Jacqueline and her friend, hey, I'm going to head up to the house and I'm going to look at the firearm. Jacqueline got into her car with her friend. We left the parking lot and Jacqueline proceeded to just stomp the gas. I lost sight of them. My worry is that they were going to beat me to the house. She was going to hurry up and get the gun and she was going to disappear.
When investigators arrive at the house, they find Jacqueline with her friend's mother, Angela.
When I made my way into the kitchen, there lied a Taurus 9mm sitting in a box. And I grabbed the magazine and I looked at the make of the casings and it said Blazer. And I'll never forget, my hand actually started to shake a little bit because I knew this was the weapon that had killed Corey.
Then he goes to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Tampa, their crime laboratory there, to do the firearms examination and comparison.
I still couldn't place her under arrest at this time. I didn't have a way of putting her at the scene. I still didn't know for a fact that this firearm was the one used. I had to wait till FDLE could give me those results.
As prosecutors, we often want law enforcement to close every potential loophole. You might think you have probable cause, which is the standard for law enforcement to make an arrest. The standard for me to prosecute is proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Two days after Jacqueline Johnson-Cabrera's gun was sent for analysis, ballistics experts deliver their report to investigators.
They were able to confirm that the firearm collected from Jacqueline Cabrera was indeed the weapon used to fire that shell casing and bullet recovered at the scene.
The following morning, U.S. Marshals arrest Jacqueline at her home in Ocala, Florida. She is initially charged with second-degree murder.
After submitting a search warrant, we learned that her cell phone was completely wiped. So I utilized an investigative tool that processes open source and dark web data. They were able to prove that Jacqueline had an app on her phone that was linked to her email. That app linked to Corey's neighbor's Wi-Fi address. So I was able to prove she for sure was there during the crime that was committed.
I believe Jacqueline snapped just because she could not accept the fact that Corey moved on. You can tell that she was in a very dark place.
She didn't have many people in her life. Jacqueline believed that if she could not have him, nobody could.
I believe that she knew Corey's pattern. Of course, she knew his pattern. And she snuck into the house and ambushed him.
There was a contact wound to the left palm, exit out of the left side of the hand. The injury on the palm suggested to me that he was startled. He put his left hand up, and Jacqueline fired that round at close range, striking his left hand and ultimately hitting him in the face and killing him.
The fact that she woke him up first. She had to be spiteful enough to let him know that she wasn't going to let this go. And I mean, for that, that's a hard thing to live with.
Jacqueline appears stoic in court, and a grand jury increases the charge to murder 1, which means she will face the death penalty. In June 2024, her attorneys contact prosecutors to work out an Alford plea for first-degree murder and burglary in exchange for 2 life sentences.
Florida is a no-parole state. It's that simple. The only way she comes out of prison is when she's in a box, dead.
I said 100% she can take life in jail. I said, I want her to be tortured the way she killed Corey. Why did she wake him up before she killed him? Why? Because you're pure evil. Pure evil. So yeah, she deserves some evil.
You could say justice is served, but it doesn't make it hurt any less. It doesn't hurt the family any less. It doesn't bring Corey back.
It was very, very difficult in the beginning to talk about, to see pictures of him, and just a song on a radio that we remembered he loved would make me cry. It was very difficult at holiday time. It still is difficult, don't get me wrong. And that emptiness that you feel inside will never go away.
I think about him every day. It's heartache. You see parents with their kids, you don't get that anymore. You know he's been robbed of his future. He doesn't get to have children. He would have been a great dad.
Even though he's not here, I still hope he's proud that we can get his story out there and let it be known. He was the kindest, most genuine, he was an amazing human, and everyone he met and knew, they all knew it.
The coffee was still warm. That was the detail no one could shake. Not the open door. Not the missing woman. Not even the silence that settled over the apartment like something alive. It was the coffee. Half a cup, steam barely gone, sitting untouched on the kitchen counter as if time itself had paused and forgotten to move forward. July 1995. Jacksonville, Florida. Heat already pressing against the windows before sunrise. The kind of morning that sticks to your skin. Thick, slow, unforgiving. The kind of morning where nothing unusual is supposed to happen. But something did. At 6:42 a.m., a neighbor walking his dog noticed the front door across the hall slightly ajar. Not wide open, not broken, just wrong. Enough to make him stop. Enough to make him look twice. He called out her name. No answer. The dog whined, then barked once. Sharp, nervous. Like it sensed something its owner couldn't see. By 7:15, police were inside. No signs of struggle.
No overturned furniture.
No shattered glass. The apartment looked frozen mid-routine. Purse hanging neatly by the door. Keys missing.
Shoes gone.
Bed made. Curtains still drawn. And that coffee. Still warm. Detectives exchanged looks. This wasn't a burglary. Not a typical abduction either. There was no chaos here.
No panique.
Whoever left that apartment left quickly. Or was taken so cleanly it left nothing behind. Her name was spoken softly at first, then louder, then everywhere. Missing. The word spread faster than the morning sun. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering, repeating the same phrases. She was so normal, always polite, kept to herself. The kind of descriptions that sound comforting until they don't, until they become meaningless. Because normal doesn't explain disappearance. It doesn't explain a door left open and a life interrupted mid-sentence. By noon, officers were knocking on every door in the complex. Questions repeated like a script. Did you see her? Did you hear anything? Anyone unfamiliar? Anyone out of place? Most answers blurred into one.
No.
Nothing. Except one. An older man, retired, sitting behind drawn blinds most days, mentioned a car. Dark-colored.
Parked longer than it should have been.
Engine running. He couldn't describe it well. Couldn't recall the license plate. Just that it lingered.
Watched.
Waited. It was written down.
Filed.
Labeled as possible relevance. Then it disappeared into paperwork. Search teams moved quickly.
Woods.
Drainage canals. Empty lots swallowed by Florida's relentless growth. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder under the sun, calling her name into spaces that never answered back. Days passed. Then weeks. Her face appeared on flyers, telephone poles, store windows, a frozen smile staring out at a city that was already beginning to forget. Mysterious disappearance. Possible voluntary leave. Cold case risk. The phrases started creeping into reports, into conversations, into the quiet spaces between investigators who had seen this pattern before. Because time is the enemy, and every hour that passes without a lead makes the silence louder. Then came the first shift. A young man stepped forward, nervous, hesitant, the kind of witness who almost doesn't come forward at all. He claimed he saw her that morning, not alone, with someone.
A man. Tall. White.
Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Nothing distinctive. Nothing memorable. Just a shape. A presence beside her. They weren't arguing. They weren't close. Just walking. Side by side. Like two strangers moving in the same direction for reasons no one else understood. A sketch artist translated memory into lines. A face emerged. Generic. Forgettable. The kind you wouldn't notice twice. Which made it worse.
Tips flooded in anyway.
Every man became a suspect. Every shadow, a possibility. The investigation expanded outward, chasing fragments that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Nothing held. Months slipped by. The case slowed. Then it stopped. Cold case. The words landed quietly at first, then permanently. Files boxed. Evidence tagged and stored. A life reduced to documents and photographs and unanswered questions. But not everyone let go. One detective kept coming back. Not because he had new evidence, not because he had orders, but because something about the scene didn't sit right. It never had.
No struggle.
No forced entry.
No noise.
It suggested control, precision, someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who didn't need violence to take someone. That idea stayed with him. Years passed. The city changed. Buildings replaced old structures. Neighbors moved away. Witnesses forgot details they once thought were important. Time erased edges, softened everything. Except the file. It stayed the same. Until it didn't. Nearly 20 years later, during a routine evidence review, a sealed bag was reopened. Inside, a small piece of fabric.
Torn.
Almost insignificant. Found near the parking lot on the morning she vanished. It had been tested once. Back then, nothing came back. Technology wasn't ready. Now it was. The sample was sent through updated systems. Compared against databases that hadn't existed in 1995. Millions of profiles. Millions of possibilities. Days passed. Then, something surfaced. A match. Not perfect at first. Partial. But enough to raise a flag. Enough to stop the room cold. A name appeared. Not a serial offender. Not a known predator. Just a man with a thin record. Minor charges. Nothing that connected him directly to her. Nothing that would have drawn attention back then. Which is exactly why no one noticed him. He lived close. Close enough to walk. Close enough to watch. Close enough to know routines without being seen. The detective saw it immediately. Distance matters. And proximity can be everything. The case reopened. Quietly. Investigators retraced steps taken decades earlier. re-interviewed witnesses who struggled to remember details buried under years of living. They reconstructed timelines from a world before digital footprints.
No smartphones. No GPS.
No surveillance cameras on every corner. Just memory. And memory fades. They approached him carefully.
No sirens. No spectacle.
Just a knock on the door. He answered. Older now.
Slower.
But composed.
Calm. Too calm.
He said he didn't know her. Didn't recognize the name. Didn't remember that morning. It had been a long time, he said. People forget things. He wasn't wrong. But he forgot the wrong things. When asked about his car back then, he hesitated. Just a fraction. But enough. He admitted he owned one. Dark-colored. Common. Nothing special. Just like the one the witness described. Investigators pressed further. His timeline didn't hold. Small inconsistencies.
Gaps.
Moments that didn't align with what others remembered. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to create tension. Enough to keep digging. The fabric was tested again. This time, the results were clear. A full match.
No ambiguity.
No doubt. The room changed. The air shifted. After 2 decades, the silence had a voice. But evidence alone doesn't tell a story. It builds one,
piece by piece,
until the picture becomes unavoidable. Investigators return to the beginning. The coffee. Still warm when officers arrived. That detail mattered. It meant she hadn't been gone long. Minutes, not hours. The timeline shrank,
tightened,
became precise. And within that narrow window, his presence fit perfectly. Too perfectly. Then came something unexpected. A retired officer, long out of service, heard about the reopened case and reached out. He remembered something. Not a report. Not official. Just a note scribbled in the margin of an old document. A passing observation. Male subject seen speaking with victim days prior. No follow-up. No name. Just a detail that slipped through the cracks.
Until now.
The description matched. It had always been there. Waiting. Ignored. The investigation closed in. Interrogation followed.
No shouting. No threats.
Just pressure. Slow. Controlled. Evidence laid out piece by piece. Timelines. Witness statements. The DNA. Silence filled the spaces between questions. He didn't confess. But his story shifted. Small corrections. Minor changes. Words adjusted in ways that revealed too much. Enough to see the truth forming beneath the surface. Enough to act. The arrest came without warning. No drama. Just handcuffs closing after 20 years of waiting. Headlines exploded. Florida 1995 cold case cracked. Retired detective's clue exposes killer. Community shocked by decades-old arrest. But beneath the noise, beneath the cameras and flashing lights, something remained unresolved. There was still no body. No final place. No answer to the most important question. What happened in those final minutes? Between the warm coffee, the open door, and the silence that followed. Because even when a name is found, even when the past is dragged into the light, some stories refuse to end cleanly. Some just linger. Unfinished. Haunting every space they once touched. The arrest didn't bring silence. It made everything louder. Cameras crowded the street. Reporters spoke over each other, repeating the same phrases until they lost meaning. Cold case breakthrough. Decades-old mystery. Shocking arrest. Words designed to close a story, to give it an ending. But inside the investigation room, nothing felt finished. Because the most important piece was still missing. A body. Without it, the case was incomplete, fragile, vulnerable to doubt. Defense attorneys don't need innocence. They need uncertainty. And uncertainty was everywhere. Interrogators knew it. So they went back in. Same room, same table, same man sitting under fluorescent lights that never quite reached the corners. His hands rested calmly, too calmly. Fingers still, eyes steady. A man who had spent years living a normal life because no one had ever forced him to relive what happened.
Until now.
They didn't start with accusations. They started with time. 1995.
July.
Morning. They walked him through it slowly. Let the silence stretch. Let memory become a trap. People forget details, but they remember patterns. And patterns expose lies. He said he woke up early. Said he stayed home. Said it was just another day. But investigators already knew that wasn't true. They placed the evidence in front of him piece by piece. The car. The proximity. The witness. The fabric. Each one alone was manageable, explainable, dismissible. Together they tightened. He shifted slightly in his chair. Not panic. Not fear. Just discomfort. A crack. They pressed harder. Why was his car seen idling near the apartment complex? Why did a witness place him walking beside her? Why did his DNA end up on fabric found at the scene? The questions came faster now.
Short. Direct.
No space to breathe between them. He didn't answer immediately. Then he did what many do. He adjusted his story. Not completely, just enough to survive the moment. He admitted he might have been in the area. Said he used to drive through there sometimes. Said maybe he saw her once or twice. Maybe they spoke. Casual. Nothing important. Nothing memorable. But memory doesn't work like that. You don't maybe remember speaking to someone who disappears the same day. Unless you're trying not to remember at all. The interrogation stretched for hours.
No confession.
But something else emerged. Fragments. He described her differently than someone who barely knew her should. Small details. The way she spoke. The way she carried herself. Observations too specific to be coincidence. Investigators didn't react. They just wrote it down. Because those details, they weren't defense. They were exposure. Outside the room, another team was digging deeper. Reconstructing his life in 1995.
Jobs.
Friends. Movements. Habits. And patterns began to surface. He wasn't random. He was observant. Quiet. The kind of man who blends into the background, who notices routines, who watches without being noticed. The kind of presence people feel, but can't explain. Neighbors from his past described him the same way. Polite. Distant. Unsettling in ways they couldn't define.
No accusations.
Just impressions. But impressions matter when they start to align. Investigators mapped the timeline again. Minute by minute. The coffee was still warm. That meant she left recently. Or was taken quickly.
No struggle.
That meant trust or control. The door open. That meant interruption. Everything pointed to a moment, small, precise, almost invisible, where something shifted from ordinary to irreversible. And he was there. Too close. Too present. Too involved. They brought him back in. This time, they changed strategy. No pressure. No rapid questions. Just quiet. They let him sit. Minutes passed. Then longer. Silence is uncomfortable. People fill it.
He did. He started talking about his life now,
his routines, his habits, trying to anchor himself in the present, trying to create distance from the past. Investigators let him. Then they pulled him back.
Gently.
What did you say to her that morning? A pause. Longer this time. He exhaled slowly. Said he didn't remember. Said it wasn't important. But his voice had changed.
Subtle.
Barely noticeable. Except to people trained to hear it. They leaned in. You spoke to her before that day, didn't you? Another pause. Then a nod.
Small.
Reluctant. He admitted it. They had spoken before. A few times. Casual. Nothing serious. But now the distance was gone. Now there was connection. Now there was opportunity. Investigators moved in. Did she trust you? He hesitated. Then shrugged. Maybe. That word again. Maybe. It hung in the air like something heavier than it should be. Because maybe can mean anything. And in this room it meant everything. They shifted again. Showed him the fabric. Explained the DNA.
No confusión. No complexity.
Just the fact. It matched him.
Completely.
He stared at it. For the first time, his composure broke. Not dramatically. Just enough. A tightening around the eyes. A slight movement of the jaw. Recognition. He knew what it meant. They didn't ask how it got there. They asked why. Why was your DNA at the scene of a disappearance that has no explanation? Silence.
Long.
Heavy. Then he spoke. Said he couldn't explain it. Said it must be a mistake. But his voice wasn't steady anymore. And investigators knew they were close. Very close. Outside, prosecutors were already building the case. Circumstantial, but strong. DNA. Witness.
Proximity.
Inconsistencies. And one more thing. Behavior. After her disappearance, he didn't leave town. Didn't act nervous. Didn't draw attention. He just continued. As if nothing had happened. As if a life hadn't vanished within walking distance of his own. That kind of calm isn't normal. It's controlled. Back in the room, they made one final move. They returned to the beginning. The coffee. Still warm. They explained what that meant. The timing. The narrow window. The impossibility of coincidence. They placed him inside that window. Step by step. Until there was nowhere else for him to stand.
He looked down.
For a long time. Hands still on the table. The room quiet again. And then he spoke. Not a confession. Not fully. But something close. He said he saw her that morning.
Said they talked.
Said it wasn't supposed to go anywhere. Said things changed.
Fast.
Unexpected. Out of control. But he never said what happened next. He stopped there. Right at the edge. Where truth begins to show itself, but refuses to step forward. Investigators waited. But he didn't continue. He leaned back. Closed himself off again. The moment passed. And just like that, the door shut.
But it didn't matter.
Because what he had already said was enough. Enough to place him there. Enough to confirm the connection. Enough to push the case forward. Charges were filed. The system moved.
Slow.
Deliberate. preparing to bring a story buried for decades into a courtroom where every detail would be dissected, challenged, tested. But outside the legal process, outside the structure of evidence and procedure, something else lingered. A question. Still unanswered. What happened after that conversation? What turned a normal morning into a disappearance that left no trace? What did he do in those missing minutes between the warm coffee and the silence that followed? Because he was there. He admitted that much. He spoke to her. Walked with her. Stood close enough to leave a trace. And then she vanished.
No oís. No struggle.
No body. Just absence. And a story that still refused to reveal its final piece. Even now. Even with the truth closing in. Even with the past dragged back into the light. Somewhere in that gap between what is known and what will never be said, the real ending still waits.
Hidden.
Unspoken. And just out of reach. The story didn't move forward. It circled. Around the same moment, the same missing minutes, the same silence that refused to break. In court filings, it looked clean, structured, logical, a timeline drawn in straight lines, supported by evidence, reinforced by testimony. But outside the paperwork, outside the neat framing of facts, the truth felt jagged, incomplete, like something had been forced into shape without ever fully fitting. Because there was still no body. And without it, the defense found space. They didn't deny the DNA. They didn't challenge the presence. They attacked the interpretation. They carved doubt into every gap the investigation couldn't fill. They asked the question again and again, in different forms, with different tones, until it echoed through the room. Where is she? No answer. Just silence. The kind that weakens certainty. The kind that lingers. Prosecutors responded with precision. They rebuilt the narrative piece by piece. They didn't rely on one moment. They relied on accumulation.
The car.
The witness. The proximity. The timeline tightened by the coffee still warm. The fabric. The admission, partial, but enough. They didn't need a body, they argued. They needed a story that made sense. And his didn't. But logic isn't always enough. Because people don't just listen to facts. They listen to absence. And absence was everywhere. While the legal battle prepared to unfold, investigators kept working. Quietly, relentlessly. Because one thing still mattered more than conviction. Location. They needed to find where she ended up. Because somewhere out there, hidden under years of change, construction, erosion, was the final piece. The one that would close the circle. The one that would silence the question that refused to fade. They went back to maps. Old ones. From 1995. Before roads were expanded. Before land was cleared. Before empty spaces became something else entirely. Florida had changed. Rapidly. Entire sections of land reshaped, built over, forgotten in their original form. Which made the search harder. And more urgent. They studied his movements again. Every place he could have gone within that narrow window. Every route that avoided attention. Every space that offered isolation. There weren't many. But there were enough. Wooded patches. Drainage canals. Construction zones that no longer existed. Places where something could disappear and stay that way. Search teams returned. Not with volunteers this time. With specialists. Ground-penetrating radar. Soil analysis. Equipment that could read what the surface tried to hide. They moved slowly, methodically, scanning areas that had already been searched once, but never like this. Hours turned into days. Nothing. Then something. A disturbance in the soil. Small, subtle, the kind of anomaly that could be natural or not. They marked it. Carefully. Excavation began. Every movement controlled. Every layer removed with precision. Because after 20 years, what remained would be fragile, broken by time, changed by the environment. Investigators watched.
Silent.
Waiting. Then the tools stopped. A shape. Not clear. Not complete. But wrong. Too structured to be random. Too deliberate to be ignored. The air shifted. The kind of moment that doesn't need words. Because everyone there understands what they're looking at before it's confirmed. The site was secured. Expanded. Excavation continued. And slowly, piece by piece, the ground began to give something back. Remains. Not intact. Not whole. But enough. Enough to confirm what everyone already felt. She had never left willingly. She had never walked away. She had been taken. And she had been left there. For years. Unseen. Unnoticed. Waiting. The discovery hit like a shockwave. Not loud. Not explosive. Just heavy. Final. Because now the silence had form. Now the absence had weight. And the case, once built on fragments, had something real to anchor it. Forensic teams moved in. Careful.
Precise.
Every detail documented. Every fragment analyzed. Because even now, even after all this time, the evidence mattered. What they found told part of the story. Not all of it. But enough. There were signs.
Subtle.
But clear. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't something that just happened. This was control. Again. Just like the apartment. Just like the absence of struggle. Just like the clean disappearance. Everything pointed back to the same idea. This had been intentional. From the beginning. The news broke quickly. Remains found in 1995 cold case. Missing woman located after decades. Major development shocks community. The headlines returned. Stronger this time. Heavier. Because now there was no space left for doubt about what happened.
Only questions about how. And why.
Back in custody, he was informed. They didn't show emotion. Didn't react. Just presented the fact. Remains had been found. The investigation had moved forward. Again. He listened. Quiet.
Still.
But something changed. Not visibly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Because the unknown, the one thing that had protected him, that had kept part of the story hidden, was gone. Now there was evidence in the ground. And it spoke louder than anything he could deny. They brought him back into the room. Same table. Same lights. But this time the weight was different. Because now they weren't asking what happened. They were asking him to explain what couldn't be undone. They laid it out again. The timeline. The contact. The presence. The DNA.
And now.
The location. They showed him the map. Marked.
Precise.
A direct line from where she disappeared to where she was found. He stared at it. Longer than before. Hands still. Eyes fixed. And for the first time there was no immediate answer.
No adjustment.
No maybe. Just silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. They didn't rush him. Didn't interrupt. They let the moment stretch. Because sometimes pressure isn't applied. It builds on its own. He spoke eventually.
Slow.
Measured. Careful. He said he didn't remember everything. Said it had been too long. Said things weren't clear. But that wasn't new. What mattered was what came next. He admitted there was a struggle.
Brief. Contained. He said she resisted.
Not loudly. Not enough for anyone to hear. But enough. Enough to change everything. Enough to turn something controlled into something irreversible. He stopped there. Again. Right at the edge. Where explanation begins, but truth demands more. Investigators leaned in. What happened after that? Silence. Longer this time. Then a shake of the head.
He wouldn't say.
Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it didn't matter the same way anymore. Because now the story had shape. Now it had weight. Now it had a place. The legal case strengthened overnight. What was once circumstantial became physical. Tangible.
Real.
The defense shifted strategy. They couldn't question whether she was gone anymore. They couldn't question whether he was connected. So they focused on intent. On uncertainty. On those same missing minutes. They tried to keep the story incomplete. Because incomplete stories leave room. And room creates doubt. But outside the courtroom, outside the strategies and arguments, the impact was already settling in. The community felt it. Not relief. Not closure. Something else.
Heavier.
Because knowing where she was didn't erase the years she wasn't found. Didn't return the time. Didn't answer everything. It just changed the silence. From empty to full. And somewhere in that shift the case transformed. From a disappearance to something undeniable. Something final. Something that could no longer hide behind unanswered questions. And yet even now, even with the ground opened, even with the truth pushing through layers of time, one thing still remained just out of reach. The full story. The exact sequence. The final moments. Because even when everything points to one conclusion, even when the evidence closes in from every direction, there are always pieces that stay buried. Not in the ground, but in memory. In choice. In silence. And those are the ones that never fully come back. The courtroom didn't feel like justice. It felt like pressure.
Tight.
Controlled. Every movement measured. Every word chosen with surgical precision. Air conditioning hummed overhead, but the room still carried a weight that no system could cool. Reporters lined the back rows. Notebooks open. Pens ready, waiting for something decisive, something final. But this case refused to be simple. Because even with the remains found, even with the timeline reconstructed, the truth still had edges that didn't connect cleanly. The prosecution began with certainty. They built their narrative like a slow, tightening spiral. Starting with the morning, the coffee, still warm. That detail came back again, sharper now. More powerful. Because it anchored everything. It proved timing. It proved proximity. It proved that whatever happened happened fast. Too fast for coincidence. They moved to the witness. The man who saw them walking together. Side by side. Not arguing. Not struggling. Just moving.
Calm.
Controlled. A moment that seemed ordinary until it wasn't. Then the car. Dark-colored. Idling. Waiting. A presence in the background that no one noticed until it became impossible to ignore. Each piece alone was fragile. Together they formed structure. Then came the fabric. The courtroom shifted when it was introduced.
Carefully.
Almost quietly. As if the weight of it didn't need to be announced. Because everyone already understood. DNA. A match. Complete.
No ambiguity.
No explanation that could remove it from the scene. The defense didn't deny it. They reframed it. They suggested transfer, secondary contact, innocent interaction. They built alternative paths for the same evidence, turning certainty into possibility. Because possibility is enough. It doesn't need to be likely. It just needs to exist. Then the prosecution revealed the location where she was found. The map appeared again, marked
direct.
A line connecting disappearance to discovery. The distance wasn't far. That detail mattered. It suggested familiarity. It suggested intent. It suggested that whoever placed her there knew the area well, knew where to go, knew where not to be seen.
The jury watched. Silent.
Absorbing. Because now the story wasn't abstract anymore. It had a place. It had ground. It had something real beneath it. Witnesses followed. One by one. The neighbor who saw the door. The man who noticed the car. The witness who saw them walking together. Each voice added another layer. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just consistent.
Steady.
Reinforcing the same pattern from different angles. And then came the retired officer. Older now. Slower. But clear. He spoke about the note. Not official. Not filed. Just something written in the margin. A detail that didn't seem important at the time. Male subject seen speaking with victim days prior. He explained why it wasn't followed up. Lack of connection. Lack of urgency.
Too many leads.
Too little time. But now, standing there decades later, that small note felt like something else. A missed moment. A door that could have been opened earlier. The courtroom absorbed it differently. Not as evidence, but as weight. Because it meant the truth had been close once and slipped away. The defense moved quickly to contain it. They questioned memory,
time,
reliability. They pointed out the gap between then and now. The way recollection changes. The way certainty fades. They try to turn the note into something fragile, something uncertain. But the damage or the impact was already done. Because even if memory shifts, patterns don't. And the pattern was clear. Then it was his turn. He didn't take the stand. But his presence was constant. Sitting there. Still. Watching. Listening. A man who had lived freely for decades, now reduced to observation. Every reaction noted. Every movement analyzed. Because silence can say more than words. The prosecution returned to his own statements. Not a confession, but fragments. Admissions of presence. Admissions of contact. Small cracks that revealed too much. They replayed them carefully, word by word, letting the jury hear the hesitation, the shifts, the moments where his story adjusted just enough to avoid breaking, while still exposing the truth beneath it. Then they introduced the final element. Behavior. After the disappearance, they showed how he stayed. Didn't leave. Didn't panic. Didn't insert himself into the search. Didn't ask questions. He just continued. As if nothing had happened. As if the absence next door or down the street meant nothing. That kind of calm isn't ordinary. It's calculated. The defense pushed back hard. They argued normalcy. Routine. They said people react differently. That absence of panic doesn't equal guilt. That staying doesn't prove anything. And they were right. Individually. But again, this case wasn't built on one piece. It was built on accumulation. And accumulation becomes weight. The courtroom tension tightened with each passing hour. Because everyone could feel it. This wasn't about proving something happened. It was about defining how. And that's where uncertainty still lived. The prosecution addressed it directly. They acknowledged the gap, the missing minutes. They didn't try to fill it completely.
They showed its outline.
A conversation. A shift. A moment of control turning into something else. A struggle.
Brief. Contained.
Enough. Then movement. Transport.
Concealment.
They didn't need every second. They needed enough to show inevitability. And they did. The defense seized on that gap. They expanded it. Turned it into space. Into doubt. They asked the same question again. Over and over. What exactly happened? How did it happen? Where is the proof of that specific moment? Because without it, the story isn't complete. And incomplete stories can't convict beyond doubt. The jury listened.
Carefully.
Because both sides were right in different ways. The truth was there. But it wasn't whole. And that tension sat in the room like something alive. Watching. Waiting. Closing arguments approached. The final push. The last chance to shape how everything would be remembered. The prosecution spoke first. They didn't raise their voice. Didn't dramatize. They kept it tight. Focused. They returned to the beginning. The coffee. Still warm. A life interrupted mid-motion. A moment that should have continued, but didn't. They walked through the evidence again. Not in detail. In clarity. Showing how each piece connected. How each fragment pointed in the same direction. How coincidence, when stacked repeatedly, stops being coincidence. And becomes something else. Something deliberate. They ended simply.
She didn't vanish.
She was taken. And he was there. The defense followed.
Calm.
Measured. They didn't attack aggressively. They introduced doubt.
Carefully.
Precisely. They reminded the jury of what wasn't known. Of what wasn't proven. Of what couldn't be seen. They asked them to hold on to that uncertainty. Because that's where reasonable doubt lives. In the spaces between facts. In the moments that no one witnessed. In the silence that still remains.
They sat down.
And just like that, it was over. No more arguments. No more framing. Just the jury. And the weight of everything they had heard. Deliberation began. Hours passed. Then more. The courtroom emptied slightly. But the tension stayed. Unmoved. Because now the story no longer belonged to investigators. Or attorneys. Or headlines. It belonged to 12 people sitting in a room deciding how to interpret a truth that was clear in some places and incomplete in others. Outside, the world waited. Inside, the silence returned. Not the same silence as before. Not empty. Not distant. This one was different. This one was filled with everything that had been uncovered and everything that still wasn't. Because even now, even at the edge of resolution, even with the past dragged fully into the light, the case still held something back. Something that refused to be fully explained. Something that existed in that narrow gap. Between what can be proven and what actually happened. And that gap was where the final answer still hid. The verdict didn't arrive with noise. It came in quietly. A shift in the room. A movement of chairs. The sound of the jury returning, one by one. Faces controlled, unreadable. No one spoke.
No one needed to.
Because everyone felt it, the moment had finally closed in. 20 years of silence reduced to a single decision. He stood as they entered. Slowly. Deliberately. Not resisting. Not reacting. Just moving through the process like he had rehearsed it in his mind long before it ever happened. The judge looked at the foreperson. A simple question. Have you reached a verdict? A pause.
Short.
But heavy enough to stretch across decades. Yes. That word changed the air.
Completely.
The courtroom leaned forward without moving. Reporters tightened their grip on pens. The victim's family held still in a way that only comes from bracing for something irreversible. The paper was handed over. Folded.
Ordinary.
Carrying everything. The judge read it once. Then again, silently. A flicker, barely noticeable, passed across his expression before he spoke.
Clear.
Controlled. Final.
Guilty.
The word landed without echo.
No outburst. No collapse.
Just impact. Because after years of questions, after decades of absence, after every gap and every doubt and every missing piece the system had spoken, the room didn't explode. It tightened. Like something had finally snapped into place, but not perfectly. Never perfectly. The victim's family didn't celebrate. They didn't cry immediately. They just sat there. Still. As if absorbing the weight of something they had waited too long to feel. Because this wasn't relief. Not fully. Relief would have come earlier. Relief would have come when she was found. When the truth first surfaced. This was something else. Heavier. Quieter. Final in a way that didn't fix anything. He showed almost nothing.
No anger. No shock.
Just a slight shift of his eyes. A breath taken a fraction deeper than before. The kind of reaction that reveals control more than emotion. Because even now, even at the moment everything closed in around him, he didn't break. Sentencing was scheduled. But the verdict had already done its work. It had turned uncertainty into conclusion. It had given the case a direction. A label. A definition. But outside the legal frame, outside the structured language of justice, something remained unresolved. Because the verdict answered one question.
Who?
But it didn't fully answer the others.
How? Why?
Those still lived in the same space they always had. Just beyond reach. In the days that followed, the story spread again. Stronger this time. Florida 1995 cold case solved. Guilty verdict after decades of mystery. Justice delivered. The headlines were cleaner now. More confident. Because finality sells better than uncertainty. But the people closest to it didn't experience it that way. They returned to the site. The place where she had been found.
No cameras this time. No reporters.
Just quiet. The ground had been restored, but it wasn't the same. It never could be. Because once a place becomes part of a story, like this it carries it forever. They stood there. Not speaking. Because what do you say after something like that? What words fit?
None. So they didn't try.
They just stood. And remembered. Not the case. Not the investigation. Her. Before everything changed. Before she became a headline. Before her life was reduced to evidence and timelines and courtroom arguments. Back when she was just there. Normal.
Alive.
That's the part that never fits into the story. Because stories like this, they focus on the moment things break. Not the life that existed before. Back in the courtroom, sentencing day arrived. Less crowded this time. Less tension. Because the outcome was already known. This was formality. Procedure. The final step in a process that had taken decades to complete. He stood again. Same posture. Same stillness. The judge spoke at length.
About the crime.
About the time that had passed. About the impact. Not just on the victim, but on everyone connected to the case. The family, the community, the investigators who carried it long after others moved on. Words meant to frame what couldn't fully be explained. To give structure to something that resisted it. Then the sentence.
Life. No ambiguity.
No reduction.
No escape.
It landed heavier than the verdict. Because this wasn't about guilt anymore. This was consequence.
Permanent.
Irreversible. He listened. Said nothing. Didn't react. Just absorbed it the same way he absorbed everything else. Quietly. Controlled. But even as the sentence closed the legal chapter, it didn't close the story. Because there were still moments missing. Still pieces that never surfaced. Still a sequence of events that only one person fully knew and chose not to reveal. Investigators accepted it. They had to. Because not every case ends with complete clarity. Some end with enough. Enough to act. Enough to conclude. But not enough to fully understand. And that difference matters. The retired detective, now older, slower, watched from a distance. He didn't speak to reporters. Didn't take credit. He just observed. Because for him, this wasn't about the verdict. It was about the moment the case reopened. The moment something forgotten became visible again. A small piece of fabric. A detail overlooked. A clue that refused to stay buried. That was the real turning point. Everything else followed. He left the courthouse quietly. No attention.
No recognition.
Just another figure walking away from something that had defined years of his life. Behind him, the system moved on. Cases continued. Files opened. Files closed. Because that's what it does. It doesn't stop. But this one stayed. In memory. In conversation. In the spaces where people still ask the same question. Not out loud. Not in court. But in quieter moments. What really happened. Not the outline. Not the evidence. The exact moment.
The shift.
The reason. Because even with everything resolved, even with the truth exposed as far as it could go, that final piece remained untouched. And maybe it always would. Because some stories don't end with full clarity. They end with a boundary. A line between what is known and what will never be said. And that line is where the real weight sits. Not in the verdict. Not in the sentence. But in the silence that remains after everything else is finished. The kind of silence that doesn't fade. Doesn't disappear. It just settles. Becomes part of the place. Part of the memory. Part of the story. And long after the headlines are gone, long after the courtroom is empty, long after the system has moved on to something else. That silence stays. Unchanged. Waiting. For answers that will never come. The verdict closed the courtroom. But it did not close the investigation. Because some cases don't end when the judge leaves the bench. Some cases follow people home. They remain in old photographs. In forgotten documents. In conversations that begin with "Do you remember?" and end with silence. The Florida 1995 cold case had finally produced a conviction. But the questions that survived the trial were not the kind that could be answered by a sentence. They were deeper. How had someone lived for decades carrying a secret that destroyed another life? How had a neighborhood continued normally while the truth remained hidden only a few miles away? And, perhaps the most haunting question of all, were there warning signs that everyone missed? After the conviction, investigators returned once again to the past. Not because they doubted the verdict, because they wanted to understand. They began examining the years before the disappearance. The years when the suspect was still invisible, before his name appeared in headlines, before his face became connected to one of Florida's most disturbing mysteries. They searched through old records, old complaints, old interviews, old memories. And slowly, another picture began to form. Not of a stranger, but of someone who had spent years learning how to disappear in plain sight. Neighbors described him as quiet. Almost too quiet. The type of person who could live nearby for years without anyone truly knowing him. He wasn't the person people feared walking down the street. He wasn't the obvious threat. He wasn't the man everyone watched. And that was exactly what made him dangerous. Because the most difficult people to identify are often not the ones who look suspicious. They're the ones who look ordinary. The investigation uncovered moments from his past that had once seemed insignificant. Arguments. Complaints. Situations where people felt uncomfortable around him. Nothing that created a criminal case. Nothing that triggered immediate action. Just small fragments. Pieces that only became meaningful after everything else was known. That is the terrifying reality of many cold cases. The clues often exist, but they don't reveal themselves until after the answer is already found. Before the disappearance, he had built a life that appeared stable. Work, routine, familiar places, familiar faces, a normal surface. But underneath that surface was something harder to see. Control. Investigators believed control was the center of the entire crime. The apartment. The timing. The lack of noise. The disappearance. Nothing suggested chaos. Nothing suggested panic. It suggested planning. A person who understood how quickly a normal moment could become something else. And that realization changed how detectives viewed the case. They stopped asking only what happened that morning. They started asking what kind of person could make it happen. Psychological experts examined the behavior patterns. Not to create excuses. Not to explain away responsibility. But to understand the choices. They pointed out that certain offenders don't appear dangerous because they don't present themselves that way. They build trust. They maintain routines. They hide behind familiarity. They survive because people don't expect darkness from someone who looks ordinary. That was one of the most unsettling parts of a case. The possibility that the answer had been nearby all along. Not hidden in another city. Not buried under a false identity. Just living. Working. Moving through everyday life. While a family waited for answers. While a community wondered. While one detective kept looking. The retired detective became a symbol of persistence. But privately, he carried something different. Regret. Not because he failed. The case had finally been solved. But because he knew how many years had passed. How many opportunities were lost. How many moments disappeared into time. He looked back at the original investigation differently now. The missed note. The overlooked evidence. The witness statements that seemed incomplete. Every old decision looked different when viewed from the future. That is the cruel nature of cold cases. Hindsight turns ordinary choices into painful questions. What if someone had followed that lead? What if technology had existed earlier? What if one conversation had happened differently? But those questions don't change the past. They only reveal how fragile justice can be. The community also struggled with the aftermath. For years, the disappearance had been an open wound. A reminder that something terrible had happened without explanation. When the truth finally came out, many expected relief. But relief never arrived the way people imagined. Because answers can hurt too. Finding out what happened doesn't erase what was lost. It only changes the shape of the pain. Before, there was uncertainty. Now there was certainty. Before, there was hope. Now there was only memory. And memory can be heavy. The victim's family faced that reality every day. They had spent years imagining possibilities. Every phone call, every unidentified person, every new report. A small piece of hope surviving against impossible odds. Then came the truth. The kind of truth nobody wants. The kind that ends one nightmare but begins another. Because there is a difference between not knowing and knowing. Not knowing leaves room for dreams. Knowing removes that room forever. Years after the arrest, people still return to the story. Not because it was mysterious anymore. Because it was human. A woman disappeared on an ordinary morning. A family lost someone they loved. A community searched. A detective refused to forget. And a forgotten piece of evidence finally brought the past back. The case became another reminder of how technology can reopen doors that appeared permanently closed. The DNA evidence wasn't dramatic when it was collected. It wasn't a flashing sign. It wasn't obvious. It was just a small piece of material placed into storage, waiting. For years. Waiting for science to catch up. Waiting for someone to look again. That is what makes cold cases different. They are not always solved because someone suddenly discovers the truth. Sometimes they are solved because the truth was always there.
Hidden. Silent.
Waiting for the right moment. But even after everything was uncovered, one mystery remained. The final moments. The seconds between conversation and disappearance. The exact moment when ordinary became irreversible. Only one person truly knew. And he never fully explained it. That silence became the last unanswered piece. The final shadow surrounding the case. Because investigators could reconstruct movement. They could analyze evidence. They could create timelines. But they could never completely enter the mind of the person responsible.
They could never know the exact thoughts.
The exact decision. The exact moment when a choice was made that changed countless lives forever. And maybe that was the most disturbing truth of all. Not that a mystery remained, but that some mysteries exist because someone chooses to keep them alive. The Florida 1995 cold case was no longer unsolved. The name was known. The evidence was clear. The verdict was final. But the story remained haunting. Because behind every headline is a person. Behind every piece of evidence is a life. And behind every cold case solved, there is always a question that stays in the background. Not about the criminal. Not about the investigation. But about the moment everything changed. The moment someone decided to cross a line. A line that could never be uncrossed. And decades later, even after justice arrived, the memory of that morning remained. The warm coffee. The open door. The empty space where someone should have been. A scene frozen forever. A mystery that waited years for an answer. And a reminder that some truths may sleep for decades. But they never truly disappear. The case was solved. The courtroom was closed. The headlines moved on. But the story refused to disappear. Because some crimes don't end when the investigation ends. They continue in the memories of the people left behind. They live in neighborhoods where people still remember the morning everything changed. They exist in the files stored away in evidence rooms, waiting for someone to open them again and ask the questions everyone thought had already been answered. The Florida 1995 cold case had become a symbol. Not only of tragedy, but of time. Of how 20 years can pass while a family waits, while investigators search, while a community learns to live beside an unanswered question. And now that the mystery had a name attached to it, investigators began looking at something they had ignored for years. The hidden history. The moments before the disappearance. The small details that revealed who he really was. Because the most frightening part of the case was not only what happened that morning. It was how long the person responsible had managed to exist afterward. Quietly. Normally. Almost invisibly. Investigators returned to the suspect's background with a different perspective. Before, he was an unknown figure connected to a crime scene. Now, they were studying the life of someone who had carried a secret for decades. They searched through old employment records, old addresses, old relationships, old encounters that had once seemed meaningless, and patterns began to appear. Not dramatic, not obvious, but there. A history of controlling behavior, a need to manipulate situations, a tendency to avoid responsibility. People who knew him described someone difficult to read, someone who could appear friendly in one moment and distant in another, someone who rarely revealed what he was thinking. That detail stood out because investigators believed the disappearance was not an act of sudden emotion. It was an act of control. The scene suggested patience. The timeline suggested planning. The aftermath suggested confidence. He didn't behave like someone running from a mistake. He behaved like someone who believed he could survive the consequences. And for years, he did. That realization disturbed many people in the community because it meant the danger had not looked like danger. It looked like a neighbor, a person passing others in grocery stores, a person driving familiar roads, a person living an ordinary life while another family searched for answers. That was the part that shocked people the most. Not that a criminal existed, but that he existed quietly among them. The investigation also revealed how difficult it had been to solve the case in 1995. Technology was different. Evidence processing was slower. DNA databases were limited. Surveillance systems were almost non-existent compared to the modern world. A person could disappear from a location and leave behind only fragments. A memory. A description. A small piece of evidence waiting for a future breakthrough. The detectives who worked the original case knew that reality. They were fighting against time with tools that were incomplete. They followed every lead they had. But some answers simply didn't exist yet. And that was the painful truth. The case was not ignored. It was delayed. The evidence was waiting for the world to catch up. Years later, when investigators reopened the file, they discovered something remarkable. The original team had been closer than anyone realized. The clues were not missing. They were misunderstood. The fabric. The witness statement. The timeline. The old note. Every piece existed separately, but nobody had seen how they connected. Until decades later. That became the defining lesson of the case. Cold cases are not always mysteries because there is no evidence. Sometimes they are mysteries because the evidence is silent. Until someone learns how to listen. The retired detective understood that better than anyone. He had carried the case through years when others moved on. He kept copies of photographs. He remembered conversations. He held on to details most people considered insignificant. Not because he knew the answer. Because he believed there was still an answer. And that belief mattered. Because every cold case depends on someone refusing to forget. After the conviction, many people asked him why he continued. Why this case? Why this victim? His answer was simple. Because someone had to. Because behind every file number was a person. Behind every photograph was a life. Behind every unanswered question was a family waiting. That was the difference between solving a case and understanding one. Solving meant identifying what happened. Understanding meant remembering who was affected. The victim's story became central again. Not just the day she disappeared, but the years before. Her routines. Her personality. The people who loved her. The small details that made her more than a headline. Because true crime stories often focus on the person who committed the crime. But every investigation begins with someone who was taken away. Someone whose future was stolen. Someone whose name should never become only a case number. The community began rebuilding its memory of her. Not through the tragedy. Through the life that existed before it. People shared stories.
Moments.
Memories. The things that had been buried under years of investigation. And slowly, the focus shifted. From what was lost to what remained. But even with that healing process, the case continued to create questions. Investigators wondered if there were other victims. A person capable of hiding one crime for so long might have hidden other secrets. Authorities reviewed old missing person cases. Old reports. Old, unexplained incidents. Not because they wanted another mystery. Because they needed to know. They searched for connections. Similar timelines. Similar patterns. Similar circumstances. Nothing immediately confirmed. But the possibility remained. And that possibility added another layer of unease. Because solving one cold case sometimes opens another door. A door to questions no one expected. The suspect had spent decades appearing ordinary. That was what made him difficult to understand. How does someone carry a secret like that? How does someone wake up every morning, go to work, speak to neighbors, live a normal routine, while knowing the truth? Psychologists studying criminal behavior often describe this as compartmentalization. The ability to separate actions from identity. To create distance between what someone has done and how they present themselves. A person can appear normal because they choose what parts of themselves to reveal. And that idea frightened people. Because it meant appearances were never enough. The neighbor you trust. The stranger you pass. The person who seems harmless. None of those things tell the full story. The Florida 1995 case became more than a crime. It became a warning. A reminder that time does not always erase the truth. Sometimes it protects it, preserves it, waits for the right moment. A forgotten piece of evidence. A new technology. A detective willing to look again. One small detail can break open decades of silence. And that is exactly what happened here. A cold case that survived years of uncertainty. A mystery that refused to disappear. A clue that waited patiently in the dark. And a truth that finally returned. But even after justice arrived, even after the courtroom delivered its final decision, one image remained burned into everyone's memory. The apartment. The open door. The untouched room. The coffee that was never finished. Because that was where everything began. A normal morning. A sudden disappearance. A question that lasted 20 years. And a reminder that behind every cold case is a moment when life changes forever. A moment no one sees coming. A moment that leaves behind only silence. Until someone finally finds the courage to listen. The silence after a cold case is solved is different. Before the truth is discovered, silence feels empty. After the truth is discovered, silence feels heavy. Because once the questions have answers, people are forced to live with what those answers mean. For 20 years, the Florida 1995 disappearance existed in the space between hope and fear. A family waited for a phone call that never came. Investigators searched through memories that faded with time. A community wondered if the missing woman would ever be found. Then the past returned. Not slowly. Not gently. It returned all at once. A forgotten piece of evidence. A reopened file.
A name.
An arrest. A conviction. A story that had been buried for decades suddenly stood in the center of public attention again. But behind the headlines, another investigation quietly continued. Not into what happened. That question had been answered. This was different. Investigators wanted to understand the aftermath. What happens after justice arrives? What happens after a family receives the truth they spent years waiting for? Because solving a cold case does not erase the damage. It only changes the shape of it. The victim's family had spent years living with uncertainty. Uncertainty creates its own kind of pain. Every unknown person could become a possibility. Every unexpected phone call could become the one they were waiting for. Every new development could reopen emotions they had tried to bury. Hope becomes exhausting when it lasts too long. And then, when the truth finally arrives, hope disappears. Not because they stop caring, because there is nothing left to hope for. Only to remember. The family returned to old photographs. Images taken before the case existed. Before detectives. Before evidence. Before courtrooms. A person laughing. A person living. A person who had plans. Dreams. A future that should have continued. That was the part most people never saw. The investigation focused on the disappearance. The courtroom focused on the crime. But the family remembered the life. And that life was much bigger than one terrible morning. Meanwhile, investigators continued reviewing every detail from the original case. Not because they questioned the conviction, because they wanted to understand the failures. The moments when the truth was close but invisible. Cold cases often reveal uncomfortable lessons. They show where systems improved, where technology changed, where investigators learned, and where mistakes were made. The Florida case became an example of how easily a single overlooked detail can become trapped in time. The fabric sample. For years, it was almost meaningless. A small object among thousands of pieces of evidence collected in countless investigations. But evidence does not have an expiration date. Sometimes it simply waits. Technology transformed what was impossible into something undeniable. DNA analysis became the bridge between two different worlds. The world of 1995 and the world decades later. A world where information could be compared faster. A world where forgotten evidence could speak again. That was the power of the breakthrough. Not that it created new evidence. It revealed the importance of old evidence. The case also changed how the community viewed the passage of time. Because 20 years creates a dangerous illusion. People assume time means distance. They assume years make something less important. But for families of missing victims, time does not weaken the loss. It expands it. A birthday missed. A holiday without someone. A photograph where one person is missing. Years are not empty. They are filled with reminders. The arrest brought attention back to those moments. People who had forgotten the case began asking questions again. How had they missed it? How had someone connected to such a terrible crime lived among them? How had ordinary life continued while something extraordinary was hidden? Those questions haunted the community. But investigators knew the answer was complicated. Because criminals do not always look like criminals. They do not always announce themselves. They do not always leave obvious signs. Sometimes they blend in. Sometimes they become invisible because people expect danger to look different. That was one of the most unsettling lessons of the case. The person responsible was not a stranger from the shadows. He was someone who existed within ordinary life. Someone people could pass without noticing. Someone who understood how to appear normal. And that made the discovery even more disturbing. The investigation also examined the years after the disappearance. The decades when the suspect lived knowing the truth. They looked at his choices, his movements, his behavior. They searched for signs of guilt, signs of fear, signs that he knew the past would eventually return. But what they found was something more unsettling. Routine.
Anormale existence.
That was difficult for many people to understand. How could someone carry such a secret and continue living? How could someone wake up every morning knowing what happened? There are no simple answers. Human behavior is complicated. People can hide parts of themselves. They can separate actions from identity. They can build walls between the past and the present. And those walls can remain standing for years, until something breaks them. In this case, the thing that broke them was not a confession, not a dramatic mistake, not a sudden revelation. It was patience. The patience of investigators. The patience of technology. The patience of evidence waiting in silence. That became the final message of the case. The truth may disappear from public attention, but it does not disappear completely. Somewhere, something remains. A record. A memory. A piece of evidence. A person who refuses to stop searching. The retired detective understood this better than anyone. After decades, he had seen many cases fade away. He knew the reality. Not every missing person is found. Not every mystery receives an answer. That is why this case stayed with him. Because he knew the difference between a closed file and a solved case. A file can be closed because people run out of options. A case is solved because someone refuses to stop looking. And that difference changed everything. Years after the conviction, the case continued to be discussed. Not because it remained unsolved. Because it represented something bigger. The fight against time. The power of evidence. The importance of remembering victims. And the reality that justice can arrive late, but still arrive. However, even with all the answers investigators uncovered, one final mystery remained. The suspect's own explanation. Or lack of one. He had given pieces. Fragments. Moments of truth mixed with silence. But he never fully opened the door to what happened that morning. He never gave the complete story. And perhaps that was the final piece of control he kept. The ability to decide what the world would know. Even after conviction. Even after losing freedom. Even after the truth became public. A part of the story remained locked away. That reality stayed with everyone involved. Because justice had been served. But understanding had limits. And sometimes those limits are the hardest part to accept. The Florida 1995 cold case was no longer a mystery in the eyes of the law. But in the memories of those who lived through it, it remained something more. A reminder. A warning. A story about how quickly an ordinary day can become a lifelong nightmare. A story about how silence can last for decades. And how one forgotten clue can finally break it. Because somewhere beneath every cold case is a simple truth. Someone is still waiting. Someone is still searching. Someone is still hoping. Until the day the silence finally speaks. The final chapter of the investigation was never really about the arrest. It was about what remained afterward. Because when the cameras left, when the courtroom emptied, when the headlines moved on to the next story, the people connected to the Florida 1995 cold case were left with something far more complicated than victory. They were left with memory. And memory does not follow the same rules as the law. The law wants conclusions. a verdict, a sentence, a closed file. But grief does not work that way. Grief returns. Unexpectedly. In quiet moments. In familiar places. In the smallest details. A song. A photograph. A street they once drove down. A morning that feels ordinary until suddenly it isn't. For the victim's family, the years after the conviction became a different kind of journey. Not a search anymore. That part was over. But learning how to live with the answer. And sometimes answers are heavier than questions. For decades, uncertainty allowed imagination to exist. Maybe she had escaped. Maybe someone would find her. Maybe there was still a chance. Those thoughts had kept hope alive. But the truth removed every possibility. The truth gave them a name. A location. A timeline. But it could not give them back what was taken. That was the cruel reality of solved cold cases. Justice can punish the person responsible, but it cannot reverse time. It cannot return lost years. It cannot restore birthdays that passed. It cannot replace conversations that never happened. The investigation had ended. The impact had not. Meanwhile, law enforcement continued studying the case. Not as an active investigation. As a lesson. Because every cold case solved creates another question. How many others are still waiting? How many families are still living between hope and fear? How many pieces of evidence are sitting in storage rooms, silent and forgotten? The Florida case became an example of why old evidence matters. Because time changes technology. Time changes methods. Time changes what is possible. In 1995, the small piece of evidence collected at the scene was only a possibility. Years later, it became the key. That transformation changed how investigators looked at unsolved cases across the country. Old files were reopened. Old evidence was reviewed. New technology was applied. Because somewhere inside those forgotten boxes could be another answer waiting to be discovered. The retired detective understood that better than anyone. He had spent years carrying the weight of an unanswered question. But after the conviction, he did not describe the case as a victory. He described it as unfinished business finally receiving attention. Because for him, the real achievement was not proving someone guilty. It was giving the victim back her identity. For years, her name had been connected to uncertainty, to disappearance, to an empty space. The investigation changed that. She was no longer only the woman who vanished. She became the person whose story exposed the importance of persistence. The person whose case reminded people that forgotten victims are not forgotten forever. But even with that sense of closure, investigators still examined one final possibility. Was this the only time? It was a question they could not ignore. When someone hides a crime for decades, investigators naturally look for patterns. They search for connections. Similar cases. Similar victims. Similar circumstances. They reviewed old missing person reports. Unsolved disappearances. Cases where someone vanished under unusual conditions. They looked for anything that matched. Anything that suggested a larger story. Nothing immediately confirmed. No undeniable connection appeared. But the question remained. Because sometimes the absence of evidence does not mean the absence of possibility. And that uncertainty created another layer of discomfort. The idea that one person could carry a secret for 20 years was already difficult enough. The possibility that more secrets existed was even harder to accept. The community also changed after the case. People who once believed they knew their surroundings began looking differently. Not with fear. With awareness. Because the case shattered a common assumption. That danger always announces itself. That criminals always look suspicious. that terrible acts are committed only by obvious people. Reality is more complicated. Sometimes the person responsible is someone who understands how to appear ordinary. Someone who knows how to disappear into routine. Someone who depends on the world seeing only what they choose to show. That was perhaps the most haunting part of the entire investigation. The crime itself was horrifying. But the years afterward revealed something equally disturbing. The ability to continue. To move forward. To exist among others. While carrying something hidden. The psychological questions surrounding the case continued long after the verdict. Experts examined how someone could maintain such a separation between actions and daily life. How someone could create a normal image while hiding a devastating secret. The answer was not simple. Human behavior rarely is. Some people compartmentalize. They separate parts of themselves. They build emotional walls. They convince themselves that consequences belong to another time. Until that time arrives. For this suspect, that moment came decades later. A piece of evidence. A reopened investigation. A detective who remembered. A system that refused to stop searching. The past finally caught up. And that became the lasting message of the case. Time is not always protection. Sometimes time is only delay. Because every action leaves something behind. A trace. A memory. A connection.
A mistake.
The suspect had spent years believing the distance of time would protect him. But time did the opposite. It preserved the evidence until the right moment. It allowed technology to evolve. It allowed investigators to return with better tools. It allowed the truth to wait. And waiting is what cold cases do best. They wait. Quietly. Patiently. Until someone opens the door again. Years after everything happened, the apartment where the case began became almost symbolic. The open door. The untouched room. The unfinished coffee. Those details remained powerful because they captured the exact moment when an ordinary life was interrupted. Before the investigation. Before the headlines. Before the courtroom. There was only a normal morning. A normal routine. A moment nobody realized would become permanent history. That is why cold cases stay with people. Because they begin with ordinary moments. A person leaving home. A phone call not answered. A door left open. A decision made in seconds. And then everything changes. The Florida 1995 case was solved. The name was known. The evidence was presented. The verdict was delivered. But the emotional impact remained. Because some stories are not remembered because they are mysteries. They are remembered because they remind us what was lost. A life. A future. A family's peace. A community's innocence. And even after decades pass, those losses still matter. The final image of the case is not the courtroom. Not the arrest. Not the evidence. It is that quiet apartment from 1995. A place frozen in time. A place where someone's life stopped moving forward. A place that waited years for the truth to return. And eventually, it did. Not quickly. Not easily. But finally. Because no matter how long a secret survives, no matter how deeply it is buried, there is always a chance that one day, one forgotten clue, one person who refuses to forget, can bring everything back into the light. The heavy steel doors of the central booking facility slammed shut with an echoing, metallic finality that reverberated down the stark concrete corridors, signaling the official transition of Ray Henderson from a suspected local eccentric into a confined federal prisoner held under maximum security, awaiting the ultimate judgment of a state court. Outside the facility, the media circus had reached a fever pitch, with satellite trucks lining the perimeter fences and dozens of reporters shouting over one another into live microphones, broadcasting the unprecedented developments of the resurrected 1995 cold case to millions of viewers across the country who had followed every twist and turn of the investigation with bated breath. Inside the booking room, under the harsh, unsparing glare of fluorescent overhead lights, the aging killer was subjected to the cold, impersonal rituals of the penal system, fingerprinted, photographed, and stripped of his civilian clothes before being fitted into the mandatory orange jumpsuit that instantly transformed his appearance from a harmless neighborhood handyman into a convicted predator facing the absolute wrath of the law. Arthur Vance watched the intake process through the reinforced glass of the observation booth, his expression carved from stone as he absorbed the surreal reality that the ghost which had haunted his professional nightmares for 3 decades was finally trapped inside a cage of his own making, powerless to evade the overwhelming weight of scientific proof and his own damning confession. The state attorney's office wasted zero time in filing formal indictments for 4 counts of first-degree murder, structuring a bulletproof legal case built upon the immutable foundation of touch DNA. Extracted from the silver lighter, the recovered personal effects buried beneath the toolshed, and the video-recorded confession that mapped out the chilling mechanics of his crimes with terrifying precision. The public defender assigned to represent Ray attempted a last-ditch legal maneuver, filing motions to suppress the DNA evidence on technical grounds related to the chain of custody from the original 90s investigation, arguing that degradation over 30 years could have compromised the integrity of the genetic sample. However, the presiding judge, a sharp, no-nonsense jurist known for his mastery of forensic jurisprudence, swiftly swatted down the defense motions during a heated preliminary hearing, ruling that modern analytical techniques validated by peer-reviewed science were fully admissible and that the chain of custody had been rigorously maintained by the state crime laboratory under the supervision of Dr. Elena Vance. The courtroom battles began to mirror a Greek tragedy of inevitable retribution, as the prosecution methodically prepared to dismantle every potential counterargument the defense could muster, ensuring that when the trial officially commenced, the jury would be confronted with an avalanche of unassailable facts rather than circumstantial shadows and speculative hunches. In the quiet hours of the evening, far away from the flashing camera lenses and the relentless pounding of the press corps, Arthur Vance found himself reflecting on the sheer fragility of human memory and the extraordinary power of persistence, realizing that the entire edifice of the killer's freedom had rested on a house of cards constructed from public apathy and the primitive technological limits of a bygone era. The psychological ripple effects of the arrest continued to surge through Silver Lake and the surrounding communities, prompting long overdue conversations about systemic blind spots in rural law enforcement during the 90s, a period when transient populations and hitchhikers could vanish into the vast Florida landscape without triggering the immediate, hyper-connected national alerts that characterize modern missing persons protocols today. Families of other unsolved disappearance cases from neighboring counties began flooding the sheriff's department with frantic inquiries, desperate to know whether Ray Henderson's sprawling web of terror might extend even further into the dark history of the Sunshine State, turning the investigation into an ongoing historical audit of forgotten tragedies. As the calendar pages turned closer to the official trial date, the prosecution unveiled their comprehensive witness list, featuring not only forensic experts and financial auditors who tracked Ray's movements, but also the emotional testimony of surviving relatives who had spent a lifetime wondering what happened to their loved ones when they stepped out of their front doors and never came back. The legal arena was primed for a historic reckoning, a high-stakes confrontation between the forces of absolute accountability and a man who had enjoyed 30 years of unearned peace, while his victims lay rotting in shallow graves beneath the suburban soil, setting the stage for an explosive courtroom showdown that would permanently alter the criminal justice landscape of Central Florida and cement Arthur Vance's legacy as a detective who refused to let the darkness win. The heavy oak doors of the central courtroom in Orlando swung open with a slow, solemn creak that seemed to suck all the air out of the packed gallery, instantly silencing the restless Murmurs of the hundreds of spectators, journalists, and legal observers who had crammed themselves shoulder to shoulder into the historic hall to witness the climax of a 30-year nightmare. Outside, the midday Florida sun beat down mercilessly upon a forest of television broadcast trucks and tangled satellite cables, but inside, the atmosphere was frozen in an artificial chill, heavy with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and collective anticipation. Every eye in the room was locked squarely on the center aisle as the bailiff's sharp, authoritative voice rang out, commanding all rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison, a veteran magistrate whose severe expression and silver hair bespoke decades of unyielding adherence to the letter of the law. As the judge ascended the elevated oak bench and settled into his high-backed leather chair with a measured, deliberate slowness, the tension in the room ratcheted up another notch, humming like a live electrical wire just moments before a catastrophic short circuit. Sitting at the defense table, 72-year-old Ray Henderson cut a pathetic, shrunken figure inside his bright orange jumpsuit, his shoulders rounded and his gaze glued fixedly to the polished mahogany surface before him, utterly divorced from the arrogant swagger he had worn like armor during the initial police interviews decades ago. Flanked by two court-appointed public defenders who wore expressions of quiet resignation, Ray looked less like a hardened serial predator and more like a frail grandfather overtaken by the relentless march of time, yet everyone in that room knew the horrific truth hidden beneath that fragile exterior. Just a few feet away, at the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Marcus Vance sat flanked by massive stacks of evidentiary binders, digital drives containing terabytes of forensic data, and the definitive lab reports that had shattered the killer's decades-long illusion of absolute impunity. Across the aisle, occupying the front row of the gallery directly behind the prosecution, sat the families of the victims, mothers with white-knuckled grips, siblings holding fading photographs encased in plastic sleeves, and surviving relatives whose faces bore the permanent, indelible etching of decades of agonizing, unresolved grief. Among them sat Arthur Vance, retired now from the badge, but standing tall as an honorary pillar of justice, his weather-beaten eyes fixed unwaveringly on the man who had stolen so many bright futures out in the sun-drenched orange groves of central Florida. The proceedings began not with arguments, but with the formal entry of the plea agreement that had been hammered out behind closed doors over the preceding 48 hours, a legal maneuver that short-circuited what was projected to be a grueling, emotionally draining 6-week trial. Defense counsel rose slowly, clearing his throat before announcing to the court that his client, Ray Henderson, wished to change his plea on all 4 counts of first-degree murder from not guilty to a full, unconditional admission of guilt across the board. A collective gasp swept through the gallery, a sharp intake of breath that rippled like a wave across the rows of spectators, followed instantly by a stunned, heavy silence as the magnitude of the moment settled over the room. Judge Harrison adjusted his reading glasses, his piercing gaze shifting downward to lock directly onto the defendant with a look of stern, uncompromising scrutiny that demanded absolute clarity from the lips of the killer himself. Mr. Henderson, do you understand the gravity of the decision you are placing before this court today? The judge's deep, resonant voice echoed off the high-vaulted ceiling, commanding absolute attention from every soul present in the chamber. By entering a plea of guilty to 4 counts of premeditated murder, you are permanently relinquishing your right to a trial by jury, your right to appeal the sufficiency of the evidence, and your right to challenge the forensic science gathered in this case. You are acknowledging before God, this court, and these grieving families that you took the lives of 4 innocent women in cold blood. How do you plead? Ray Henderson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently in his throat before he pushed himself up slightly from his chair, leaning toward the microphone with trembling hands. In a voice that was barely more than a dry, scratchy rasp, the aging killer uttered the 2 words that would permanently close the books on one of the state's most infamous historical mysteries. Guilty, Your Honor. I am guilty. The emotional dam broke instantly in the gallery. A muffled sob escaped from the lips of Emily Cooper's younger sister, quickly followed by the collective weeping of mothers and brothers who had waited a lifetime to hear those exact words echo through a hall of justice. For 30 long years, they had lived in the cruel, suffocating limbo of the unknown, tormented by the endless parade of false leads, dead ends, and cold indifference from an institutional apparatus that had long since written off their loved ones as permanent casualties of an imperfect world. Now, stripped of his anonymity and cornered by the infallible testimony of modern touch DNA and his own recorded confessions, the monster was finally standing in the open light of day, stripped of his power to inflict terror, reduced to a trembling confession of defeat. Judge Harrison did not rush the sentencing phase, utilizing the remainder of the morning session to allow the victims' families to take the wooden witness stand one by one, transforming the courtroom into a cathedral of collective memory and enduring human resilience. Emily Cooper's sister was the first to speak, stepping up to the microphone with a framed portrait of Emily pressed tightly against her chest like a protective shield against the pain of the past. Her voice shook with a potent mixture of unyielding strength and profound sorrow as she addressed the silent, shrinking figure of the killer across the room. "You thought you could erase Emily like she was nothing more than a footprint in the sand, Ray," she declared, her words cutting through the heavy air like a razor-sharp blade. "You thought that because 30 years passed by and your hair turned gray, you had outsmarted the universe and won your freedom in the dark. But you were wrong. You were wrong because love outlasts your cruelty, because a sister's memory does not rot in a shallow grave. And because there are good men in this world, men like Detective Arthur Vance, who refuse to let you turn human beings into forgotten ghosts. You took her youth, her dreams, and her future, but you did not take her story. Her story survived, and today, it has destroyed you." As subsequent family members took the stand to recount the devastating ripple effects of the other 3 unsolved murders uncovered beneath the tool shed, lives shattered, parents dying with broken hearts before ever knowing the truth, and siblings carrying an unbearable load of survivors' guilt, the air in the courtroom grew thicker, charged with a powerful, electric emotional gravity that moved even the hardened bailiffs and cynical press reporters to wipe tears from their eyes. Ray Henderson sat motionless through it all, refusing to lift his head, his chin buried deep into the collar of his orange prison jumpsuit, as if he hoped the wooden floorboards might open up and swallow him whole to escape the blistering heat of collective moral judgment. When the floor was finally returned to the bench for the imposition of sentence, Judge Harrison stood tall behind the mahogany rostrum, his face a mask of absolute, unyielding judicial resolve. He did not mince words as he delivered the final reckoning, eviscerating the defendant with a verbal flaying that dissected the cowardly nature of crimes committed in the shadows against defenseless victims who trusted the safety of the open road. For the calculated, predatory, and utterly merciless destruction of 4 innocent human lives, and for exploiting the vulnerabilities of a simpler era to cloak your heinous acts in 30 years of unpunished silence, this court finds no mitigating circumstances whatsoever. The judge declared, his gavel hovering like the sword of Damocles above the sounding block. You will spend the remainder of your natural days breathing recycled air behind the maximum security razor wire of the state penitentiary, stripped of every liberty, every comfort, and every illusion of peace. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court certainly will not. With 4 consecutive life sentences handed down without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Ray Henderson would die an incarcerated outcast far away from the sunlit orange groves he once stalked, the judge brought the heavy wooden gavel down with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed like a gunshot through the silent hall. The case was officially closed. The 30-year nightmare was over. Yet, as the court officers led the handcuffed killer away through the side doors toward the subterranean holding cells, leaving the gallery to a chorus of tearful embraces and shared sighs of profound relief, everyone in that room knew that the true victory belonged not to the cold machinery of the law, but to the stubborn, relentless human spirit that refused to let the darkness win.